Times have changed for camps. Personal injury lawsuits, summer vacations shortened by state governments, and increased competition from things like bike tours to Bangkok and summer school at Harvard now threaten their very existence. Many of the oldest institutions are family businesses that have seen the land value of their attractive locations skyrocket. It is not unusual for long-established places to falter as descendants push to break up the land and cash out to developers or to zillionaires in search of an ever larger weekend home, wrote Mimi Schwartz in The Not-So-Happy Campers. Summer camps had a utilitarian purpose when they were first introduced in the 1860s as a way to prepare young boys for future military careers, but they evolved as a form of recreation that instilled different desired values on children at different points in time. On this week's episode, we're going to go in a more anecdotal direction as we explore the second installment of a three-part series on American culture and the outdoors, American summer camps.
When we started coming up with the idea for these sort of 3 episodes, keeping it American, outdoorsy, with a tilt towards like the self-improvement of turn of the century America, I knew I was going to talk about summer camps because I'm a summer camp counselor type guy, basically. I did it for longer than most, and I think it stuck with me a lot. So, and it's such an interesting lens to look at, like, I guess, modern American life, but they're older than you'd think. So there's a lot there.
Yeah. Because, I mean, this is a good one to be in the middle of the last one and the next one, because those two are very historical and require more research.
Yeah.
But of course, we did do research quite a bit for this episode. But yeah, the origins of camping in general, but also specifically in America, can be traced back to Frederick William Gunn, who is an American abolitionist and an outdoorsman who's considered to be the founder of camping. But generally, when you look at biographies for him, he's like described as an abolitionist first, but his main like contribution to society is there's a very expensive boarding school in Connecticut called the Frederick Gunn School, and it costs like $66,000 a year.
Damn. Wow.
So it's one of those schools. But yeah, the way that he created camping was he marched 40 miles with a group of his students to Milford, Connecticut.
Wait, from Virginia?
I didn't say Virginia.
Okay, sorry. I thought that was where his school was. Sorry, I was getting that.
No, his school was in Washington, Connecticut.
Oh, well.
Yeah, which you think of as being an abolitionist state, but actually he was like exiled from it for a period of time.
Oh, wow. Yeah, you think of them as being real, New Englanders, Yankees, opposed to slavery. But,
Yeah, he was able to go back eventually and found this school. But by the time the Civil War was starting, he was like too old to serve in the army. So he's thinking of like, how can I help? And so he thought one of the things that he could do was prepare his students to potentially like serve in the Union Army by teaching them how to camp. Because it's been a thing for soldiers to need to know how to camp for like ever, with Roman soldiers up until the Civil War. And even into the modern day. I mean, although now you'd need like, or it would be easier to camp, like you don't need to know how to start a fire from scratch per se, but like back in the day you did. So he taught them skills like that, like how to pitch a tent, start a fire, fish, and collect food and things like that in nature.
Yeah. No, it's a lot like Boy Scouts, where it has some like militaristic leanings in the beginning, but this is a little more like ardently militant, I would say. He was really preparing kids for a war that he was too old to fight. But I feel like camping shook its origins of that pretty quickly.
Yeah, it did.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like though with both scouting and camping, both of them, when things are needed of like say scouts or campers, like they will go in a more like militaristic direction for a period of time, like say to help out in World War I or World War II.
And they kind of like go at ease in like interwar periods, I guess. But yeah, so this was like, I had an understanding of summer camp starting as like as an industrial revolution thing, but then seeing the origins of the 1860s, I'm like, yes, that's technically after the start of the industrial revolution, but like, I mean, Chicago was a sleepy hamlet in like 1860s, it wasn't like a towering industrial metropolis. But yeah, so the turn that camps took after this kind of Civil War intro period was that there were kind of two impulses. There were those who had summer camps for kind of like city kids, impoverished kids, wanting to convey upon them like the beauty of nature and the importance of connecting with it.
Yeah.
And then there was also like rich kid camps, basically, where certain like development-minded adults were getting worried about kids getting soft, basically, and not having the kind of like outdoors experience that they did growing up, because this is a country that is becoming less and less agrarian every year, more and more urbanized.
Yeah, they wanted to just like basically harden their young men.
Yeah,
and have them like rough it in the forest. But yeah, there's a lot of like different summer camps that each have their own individual histories. But you wanted to talk about the evolution of summer camps based off your own camp.
Yeah, I was going back and forth on whether or not I want to say the name of my camp.
Just say it. It's
yeah,
not
I'll
like you're
just
going
say it.
back.
No, it's true. Yeah, Phantom Lake YMCA camp in Mukwonago, Wisconsin. It's truly the most bog standard American summer camp. To those who don't know what like the YMCA is, I mean maybe European listeners and stuff, but it's this organization that's about as old as the period we're talking about. It goes back to the 1880s or so, but it was very ardently and actively Christian at the time. This was like the muscular Christianity movement, which I always thought was a great name. But that's like where you would, serve God and serve the principles of Jesus through like self-development and often in a physical way of being out in nature, being physically active. But yeah, so my camp was founded in the 1890s just for boys in the Wisconsin area, basically southwest Wisconsin. They moved around locations a bit until they bought up some land in this sleepy town. It's now like a 30-minute drive outside of Milwaukee, but it really would have been like out in the sticks back in the day. But it's pretty much been absorbed into the like urban sprawl of Milwaukee.
Yeah, so it's closer to Milwaukee than Madison.
Yes, It pulls kids from Madison nowadays, but yeah. Back in the ye olden days before cars, kids would have gotten to camp by the electric interurban train that ran from Milwaukee all the way out to Mukwonago and then even further onto this little town called East Troy. And then, these electric interurban trains all went away when cars became a thing. But the stretch of electric interurban from Mukwonago to East Troy is still open. And it's run as like a novelty old-timey train every summer. And so they do like special meals on it and stuff. But like there's really not a lot of active like interurban service.
Yeah, there's only 3 lines in it, to my knowledge, that have been in continual operation in the U.S.
Yeah. The Skokie Swift here in Chicago, that's an interurban, isn't it? Technically, kind of.
I think so. But the ones I know of are like the South Shore Line, and then I think there's 2 in Philadelphia. But no, it might actually be 1 in Philadelphia and 2 here. I might be mixing it up.
And this one really doesn't count. It's a novelty thing. We call it the trolley. I guess that's something you could, I don't know. It doesn't, I feel like it's not the right word for that. I picture trolley. I picture San Francisco trolley cars.
Yeah, well, I mean, what you think of when you picture like a San Francisco trolley car is probably a cable car, which is different than a street car. The way that
that's like the underground cable and stuff that yanks it up a hill.
And those are the only, to my knowledge, the only cable cars still in operation in the world. Like,
oh wow,
because those were replaced by streetcar technology.
Yeah, like quickly. Overhead catenary like electric streetcars. Yeah. Chicago had cable cars for like a second before they were replaced by them. I've somehow read about that. One of the buildings that like ran the powerhouse that would tug the cables is like still around and always gets turned into something new.
Yeah, I mean, there's like little signs of the streetcar lines that used to exist. Like, for example, Comfort Station in Logan Square. It's this tiny building that used to be a waiting area for people waiting for the streetcar. And now it's just like a small art gallery in the middle of the park.
That's like a cool little building. I don't know. I'm so happy it didn't get torn down. I don't know how it survived. Also, just the idea of a comfort station. That's one of those things we just don't get to have anymore.
I know. Like the CTA used to have bathrooms in every station when the system was first built, actually.
I think to a lot of people, they still have bathrooms in every station. That's just how they're treated.
Yeah, I got like dinner with my suburban cousin in Chinatown recently. And then afterwards, I was like, okay, I'm going to walk to the station. They were like, oh, hope it doesn't smell like pee. And I was kind of offended, but I was like, it doesn't smell like pee all the time.
I noticed they have those pee diverters installed in a lot of stations. I noticed it at Belmont. Yeah, it's like in all of the like corners, they put this flanged piece of metal that if you try and pee in the corner, you'll just end up peeing on your shoes. It's like literally the only thing that'll stop people. It's just like, do you want to pee on your shoes? I thought not. But yeah, so 1890s, camp is founded. In World War I, the camp was like still very active. I think it did not close during World War I. And programming became more focused on preparing boys for war. I believe they started allowing girls in the 20s, and they had like separate boys and girls camp at the start. In the 1920s, my camp received its like central lodge building. It was a donation by a rich family in honor of their son, who died with some other children when they were in a car that was hit by a train in the 1920s. So like not a lot of people had cars. They were a wealthy family, like able to donate this building. But it just seems like such a freak accident kind of way to have that happen. I know there were a lot of trains at the time, but there weren't a lot of cars. It just seems like very out of nowhere.
Yeah.
The camp survived through the Great Depression. It seems like it's not a totally recession-proof sorry, the Great Depression, I should have said 1930s. But in general, like sending your kid to camp is a little bit of a luxury. It's always going to cost more than just having your kid being at home. But I think that like, I don't know, people always make that kind of calculus. I think it's nice to get kids out of the house, like even if there is like a national economic crisis.
Yeah.
The 1940s, camp actually did briefly pause for World War II. And then we have two commemorative like fire pits, I would say, at summer camp. One celebrating Victory in Japan Day and one celebrating Victory in Europe Day, VJ and VE Day. I feel like those are forgotten sometimes.
I've never heard those terms actually.
Yeah, no, they were super like, they're spaced apart. And so they're just two like very kind of important days.
Do the fire pits look different?
Yeah, like one's a little taller, one's a little shorter, but you can kind of tell they're like built in the same year, same style.
But they're not stylistically Japanese or German.
No, it's not.
I'm
like
joking. Okay.
That would be cool. I don't know if like the European one was like a Swiss chalet or something, and then the Japanese one was actually Japanese. But no, it's just
okay. That sounds tasteful. But I was making a cross joke.
But yeah, and then so camp continues on in the 50s, and now we're having the suburbanization of America. At this summer camp, like everyone drives their kid there. I've heard of camps where like everyone shows up on a bus together. Like if it really draws from just a few cities, people all just take buses out there. But it's a whole suburban deal. We have this big grassy lot. Everyone drives into it. We used to have a fallout shelter at camp that was built in the 50s or 60s, but it got like caved in at some point. So they just demolished it. But that's just like, I don't know, the paranoia of the time, building a fallout shelter at a summer camp. And then, 60s and 70s, I feel like there's tons of photos of my camp from this period. It's just, this is, as we'll get into later, like when people picture summer camp, it's a little frozen in the 70s, 80s for a lot of people. But I think that this is when camps, we're in in the 60s and 70s, we're in the Vietnam War. So like, what are camps going to do? Are they going to become more militarized like they did in World War I and II? And the answer is no. Like if anything, it was the opposite. Like things seem very like flower power, free love, kind of like hippy dippy at my summer camp in that period.
Yeah. And then, so I don't have anything to say about your camp, but we'll both be talking about camping experience a lot in this episode.
Yeah.
But I think another thing to note is just camps in the modern day before we get started with everything else, because you noted that you think there's like an increasing specialization of summer camps.
Yeah. When I like started going to my camp, my friends were like, oh, is it like it's like a swimming camp or something, like because you do swimming? And I'm like, no, it's just a regular, there's no theme. And everyone was going like, yeah, chess camp, band camp, like all those things. And so it felt like strange to go to just like a jack of all trades, regular American summer camp.
Yeah, like I remember actually like a girl in my high school saying she'd go to swim camp in the summers, which is weird because she wasn't even on the swim team.
Oh.
It's like, why are you doing this? But yeah, on the like sort of specialization of summer camps, I like listened to an interesting episode of a podcast, Planet Money, where it was on this like summer camp called JA BizTown, where it's basically like a mini economy summer camp where like all of the kids apply for jobs and then they get jobs at these like fake businesses. And it's like this small walkable community that's entirely
and it is a sleepaway camp?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. And like, so the episode, it chronicles this like 11-year-old boy who wants to become the CEO of the town's bank. And so then he's managing the loans of all the other children and he's really stressed out about it. But like, I can't think of a more explicit way for parents to instill in their children that they expect them to become high net worth PMCs in the future.
Yeah.
Because like, this is the sort of like return on investment view of education and recreation.
Yeah. Everything like, has to have like an impact on your CV.
Yeah. Because like, so many concepts that like you can't really convey in school could be conveyed in that setting of just like, yeah, the goal is to make as much money as possible.
Yeah. I cannot imagine a little kid being a loan officer is so funny to me, like managing all this stuff. It also reminds me of those, I was watching like a YouTube video on this, but those like business kids indoor recreation parks. Are you familiar with those?
What is that?
Man, I gotta find the name for this, but it had a name like kind of like BizTown, something like that. But what it was like this thing where I went to one as a kid. I remember this, but you'd buy a ticket, you'd enter, it'd be this big indoor space, kind of like, Walmart sized, like hangar sized thing, or like a trampoline park. But you would play jobs on the inside. So there was like a little hospital for kids, a shoe store, like a bank, all that stuff. And you'd like have a role and you'd play dress up and you'd do like little like physical activities, where you're like miming the acts of a job. But some of them were kind of like the BizTown thing, where they were a lot more like, all right, like this involves math. And they had like partnerships with schools as well.
Yeah.
And so they'd like get whole clumps of kids over there and like run a little theoretical city for a day.
Yeah, I never did anything like that when I was a kid, but the same cousin I saw in Chinatown, actually, he grew up in Naperville, and where he lived, there was like this tiny community. It was like a fake small town for children where they would teach like Naperville children how to cross the street. Like they'd ever have to do that.
I've heard of those things. Yeah, like traffic safety mini towns. Yeah. No, those are outdoor.
And to me as a child, it looked amazing. I'd be like, that looks cool. Can I go do it? And then like my cousin's mom would be like, we've gone there. It's boring. They don't teach you anything fun. It just looks cool as a child.
That's so funny. That is the ultimate, like, in urbanist circles, everyone talks about like, you shouldn't rely on putting signs up and educating people on how to cross streets. Like you should infrastructure your way to safety so that like if you want to make people drive slower on a street, don't put up a sign that's like begging them to drive slow. Instead, narrow the street, add obstructions, and that seems like the line of thought of purely teaching. Like if we drive kids out to a miniature town and teach them how to safely cross a street, then we can achieve safe streets.
My thing is like I never actually assume that cars will do anything that they're supposed to.
Yeah.
I like run across the street usually instead of going at walking pace, just because I'm like I'm not going to risk
like
it.
Every car is going to like completely blow the light.
Yeah, you can't trust them to like not stop. Like if you eventually one will hit you, like you should just run and like not risk it.
Oh my God, it's man, it's a little nihilistic, but understandable.
But yeah, back to summer camps.
Yeah. So quickly summarizing my summer camps, like as we'll get into deeper later, but I went to like day camps as a little military kid on military bases put on by like local rec centers. Went to Boy Scout camp like 2 times. When I was 13, I went to a Jewish summer camp in California for 4 weeks. That was not a great experience. We'll talk about that later.
Yeah.
And then when I was 14, I started going to Phantom Lake, the YMCA camp. So I was like an actually camper for 1 year. And then the next 3 summers, I came back as a counselor in training. So what they do, so you'd have like more responsibility, you'd have like an actual 18 or older counselor in the cabin, and then you would be the little junior counselor. So I did that for 3 years. Each year you come back for more and more weeks until like your third year, your assistant counselor year, like you're there for 3 weeks, and one of them you actually act as a full-on counselor. And so I thought that was cool. I was like, oh wow, like they call it your CAC week, and that was like the big deal. It's like how well you did on your CAC week. But yeah, and so after that I made it onto staff, and I worked that for 3 summers, like in between years at college. So those ages, 18, 19, 20. And then my last year at that camp, I was kind of in like an HR role. I was like the junior person running the junior counselor program, basically. So I'd like help the kids who were like 15 and in charge of these tents for the first time and are in like often struggling into this authority role. That was really cool. It was a lot less work than actually like counseling tents. It was just a lot of fun, honestly. Like it felt bad sometimes when I saw like the counselors out there in the trenches really struggling. But yeah, I absolutely love my experience with summer camp in general. I think it's super important.
Yeah. And then my camping experiences quickly. This is really short. So I went to a camp called Camp Hoover with my Boy Scout troop 4 or 5 times. And then I also went to day camp at River Park for like 4 or 5 years. And I'll talk about day camp now if that's good.
Yeah.
Okay. So my experience at day camp. So day camps are sort of like the less illustrious version of summer camps. It's like an alternative for families of more modest means. And in Chicago, that means like going to day camp usually at the Chicago Park District, which in Chicago, the Park District is its own like government entity. It's not run through the city. And I definitely did have a fun time there. So the camp I went to is called River Park. And as I mentioned on previous episodes, the Chicago River was in my backyard. Like we had a boat back there. And this isn't common in Chicago. There's really only one community where like they have backyards where the river's in the backyard and it's Ravenswood Garden. And so I would walk up the Chicago River path like to and from camp every day. And it was like idyllic. A really nice, it was idyllic. Yeah. It was really pretty. And then when I was there, like the camp, it had a field house, a public pool, a playground, tennis courts, and baseball fields. But like so much of it, I just remember it being like The camp counselors would just bring us outside and we'd like do some sort of activity, like, I don't know, baseball. And I would be kind of bored. It was fun because of like the kids at camp that I got to talk to. Yeah. But most of the day was boring up until we went swimming because we go to the pool every day for like 2 hours.
Nice. That's a good way to burn some time with kids, definitely.
And also burn your skin. Although I don't think I got burnt much at all, but when I think back on like all the sun exposure I've had in my lifetime, that's the most concerning to me because I spent so much time in the sun as a kid.
You're wearing sunscreen though.
No, I wasn't.
What? Oh my God.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's crazy. I always got lathered up the second I went outside as a kiddo.
Well, you're much paler than me.
Yeah, no, it was just always like, it's just a part of life, like going outside and equaled sunscreen.
I can get tan. I just don't want to be because all tanning is skin damage. So I'd rather age gracefully. Mm-hmm. So now I don't really go out in the sun. But as a kid, I was like shirtless
That's
swimming.
That's a crazy sentence. I'm sorry. No, I don't really go out in the sun.
No, I do.
The cost of beauty.
No, I mean, I'll go outside, but like I'll purposely be in the shade. I wear hats now, which is strange. I didn't wear hats for like most of my life. Yeah. Not in pictures though. I hate gay guys who wear hats in pictures.
Oh, because they're hiding if they're bald or not?
No, just because like the way that gay guys wear hats is always so cringe. Because like,
they wear it in a noticeably gay way.
Yeah, no, TBH they do. Because like, you know, our friend Francis, like we were at a gay club recently and I saw someone like turn their baseball hat to the back. And I was like, oh, that's cringe. Because like, to me, honestly, when gay guys wear their hats backwards, I don't like it. I think it looks kind of childish.
Yeah. And then it's like what Ash Ketchum does. He turns around his hat in order to like go catch the Pokemon. You think the gay guy was doing that? He like turned his hat around like, all right, time to get some.
Yeah, no, because I feel like straight guys, they never wear their hat backwards. Like,
what? Have you gone to Old Town or Lincoln Park? They
do? Okay, never mind.
We can go to Rinaldi's right now. I always do, whenever I'm in like a very basic Chicago restaurant, I always ask like people, I do a hat ratio count of just how many hats are forwards or backwards. And I think that like if the backwards hats outnumber the forwards, the vibe is off. It's pretty bad usually, I'd say.
Yeah. But no, I just associate wearing hats backwards with being gay because generally on like gay guys, most of the time they're wearing a baseball cap, it's backwards. That's just my association.
It is like a juvenile thing. Yeah. I picture TJ Detweiler from the show Recess.
No, because like when gay guys want to dress straight, they dress like the kids that bullied them in middle school.
Yeah.
That's their idea of masculinity. It's not very complex.
Yeah, a playground bully.
But anyways, I was in a gay bar with Francis and this guy turned his hat backwards and then I was like, oh, I don't find that guy attractive anymore. But then he was like, oh, he's trying to look masculine. And I literally like kind of scoffed. It's like what guys are walking around in public with their hat backwards and they think they look tough. Like that is like a 1990s view of masculinity that it's just so like disconnected from the present day. Yeah. Okay, but wow, that was a big tangent.
That was a good tangent.
But yeah, I do wear hats sometimes now. I do avoid the sun, but I did swim a lot outside shirtless as a kid. But yeah, most of the time when I was like at camp, we were just at the facility, but we did get to do field trips and those were kind of cool. Like we went to Lincoln Park Zoo, we went to the Field Museum, the Logan Theater. We also went to Blacklight Mini Golf. Have you ever been to that?
No, but I can imagine. Seems like fun.
Yeah, it was cool. So like those were good memories. It was nice. But honestly though, like day camps can be like so bare bones. Cause like, for example, some of the other camps, they didn't have pools. So the park district would bus them to our camp and then they'd get to swim for a day.
Oh man, of their whole week? Like
I don't know how many times they even did that each summer. Like it must not have even been once a week. So like we were getting to swim at least, but like these other camps weren't. Mm-hmm. So like that was pretty nice.
Yeah, no, day camps are always a lot more Spartan of an affair, and they just kind of like serve a need for families that like, you know, just because the school year is out doesn't mean that you suddenly have like all the time in the world to supervise your kids. Like you need somewhere to put them. You put them in day camp.
Yeah. I do think like the main downside, I think, of day camps compared to summer camps is that I didn't make like lifelong friends from day camp. And I actually am the type to keep up with people for long periods of time. Mm-hmm. Like, you know, on this podcast, Marissa, you know, like I've known her since the 7th grade. But yeah, there were a few people from my camp that ended up going to my high school because like, you know, the way it works in Chicago, you apply. And so by the time you get to high school, like you might recognize a few faces from like random places throughout your youth. And that was definitely the case with me, but I didn't talk to either of them. And so like, you know, like for you and also like other friends that I know that have gone to camp, like they hang out with like adult like friends from camp.
Yeah.
And like for example, when we went to Milwaukee, we saw like some of your friends from camp there.
Yeah. No. It's all people I like counseled with. Yeah. I don't know. We got a little like it's a pressure cooker environment, you know, like when you're like sleeping in the tents and all that, and you see each other every morning. Yeah, it really like bonds you together. And not seeing family or anything.
Yeah, because that's what I think maybe might be missing is just you don't get the same sort of like deep connection because you're not waking up and going to bed with your fellow campers in the same way.
Yeah.
Even though day camp is longer, like I looked it up and like for the park district, it lasts like 6 weeks. Yeah. Like how often did the sessions last at your camp?
So at my camp, we like sold like single week sessions, and then you could stay multiple weeks, and they'd have this like holdovers thing where kids would stay at camp over the weekend, supervised by a counselor. But yeah, some kids were real marathoners. So we'd do like a chunk of weeks, and then there'd be boys camp and girls camp, and there'd be another chunk of weeks. So like, yeah, kids could stay for a pretty long stretch. They'd always like, I don't know, other campers would like jealously tease them and be like, oh, your parents just don't want to see you. That's why they sent you here. But like kids were always jealous of the kids who got to go for multiple weeks.
Would any of them stay the entire time?
Basically, yeah. I could count them on one hand, but yeah. We would have kids who would do basically everything.
Do you think they were better or less well-adjusted than other children?
In general, more well-adjusted and more just adjusted to the camp life kind of thing. Yeah. Like a kid who is being signed up for that many weeks, like it's not their first time at camp. You know, like they've probably like kind of built up weeks. They've gone for more and more every year. And they kind of just, I don't know, the vibe is almost like prison-like, where there's like a wise old guy who's been there forever. And then there's people who kind of just like cycle in for a week. So sometimes those kids have a weird detachment to them where they're just, one thing I did notice with the kids who went for multiple weeks is they'd try and be more buddy-buddy with the counselors than their own campers sometimes, because they know that the counselors are going to be there all summer and their friends are only going to be there for a week. We try to tamp down on that. I don't know. Some kids get like real cozy and try and like, yeah, I'm like basically one of the counselors. They try and pull that, and you got to nip that in the bud.
That was sort of me like going to the libraries when I was in high school. Because at the Chicago Public Library, there's this like experimental, well, now it's not experimental, it's very established, but they had this like very experimental teen learning space called UMedia. And then they built out a whole system of them. There's like 20 in the city. But like that's actually where Chance the Rapper recorded his first mixtape.
Oh yeah,
they have like all of these cool facilities. But I would go there and I didn't want to talk to the other kids. I just talked to the librarians the whole time, and they'd let me like sit behind the desk.
That's so funny as a future librarian. This is like, yeah, I know you don't want to do being a librarian for your whole life, but like it feels like in a lot of ways you're really set up for it. You know?
No, honestly, like. It is like a good place for people who can't hold down corporate jobs. And I don't know if I'm that type of person. I guess I have to go and figure it out eventually.
Yeah, I guess it's either that or the trades, Nathan. Start bending conduit, you're going to be an electrician.
No, I don't see that. Honestly, every time I look up like trades jobs, they make way less than people act like they do.
Yeah, no, everyone like quotes numbers from very like mid to late career, like, you know, past journeyman into master.
Yeah. And then one more funny story. So one of the times when we were walking home along the Chicago River path, we actually found a rabbit, like not a wild one, but like a domesticated one that got lost or someone abandoned it. Yeah. And it came up to us and we brought it home. And, you know, we saw our dad and they were like, what if we told you we found a rabbit outside? And he was like, okay, show me the rabbit. And,
so cute.
You know, he was like, most dads were like, he was resistant to getting another family pet. But then once we got it, he actually was the one who gravitated the most to it. And he got really close with this rabbit. But the rabbit was definitely domesticated. You could tell from its like, its fur. It wasn't like that brown color that
the
wild
standard,
rabbits
like,
are.
Yeah, Chicago light brown rabbit.
Yeah. So it was domesticated, but it was really kind of feral in certain ways. Like it would grunt all the time. Like
grunt?
No, it would. It would grunt all the time. Oh. And then it would like, one time it attacked my sister's Yorkie and the Yorkie was afraid of the rabbit. And then one time it got out by accident and it was on the riverbed. And my dad was like really sad. He was like, we're not going to get it back. And then it came back on its own. And then it got out on its own again accidentally a second time. And then it kept coming back. And so then my dad sort of started to treat it like an outdoor rabbit. And it survived for several years like that. It was only once we moved out of that house when I was like 14, he then tried to do the same thing in another location that it got lost. But that rabbit was really interesting.
Oh, that's such a great. That's so like I wonder who lost their rabbit, and you're just up a rabbit basically.
Yeah,
that's so interesting.
I like rabbits. I've thought about getting a pet and maybe getting one, but they often don't live that long. So
oh yeah,
it's a bit of a risk.
I can't get a read on rabbits. I had a hamster growing up, and I feel like there's some animals that are more cute than they are actually suitable for pets. Like they're just very aesthetically pleasing to look at, but like what they were genetically meant to do is pretty opposed to what being a pet is. They're just a terrified prey animal. Like really the best pets are fellow predators, dogs and cats.
I mean, I feel that way about chinchillas. I wouldn't want to have one of those as a pet, but rabbits, no, actually, I mean, the rabbit we had, Jawa, like she proves that rabbits can have a lot of personality.
Wow. I've always thought about having a dove. That'd be kind of because like I had a friend with a bird and they're kind of cool, but I feel like their squawking is annoying. But if there was cooing in my house, I think it'd be very relaxing. I just don't know. I don't know what girls read of a guy who has a dove is. I feel like serial killer. I don't know.
That just made me, I feel like there are some like Invader Zim characters where they have like pigeons in their hair and they're cooing. And I just thought of that.
And I mean, yeah, like doves are just basically pigeons too. And if I kept pigeons, that would not be a good look. So yeah, my day camp experience, I hardly remember being a kid going to these summer like camp things. But yeah, it was like my family, when we moved to Germany, like it was a big financial hit. Like my dad was not making tons of money as a doctor in the military. And he was pretty low ranked at the time. And then living off base, using the housing stipend as opposed to like the free on base housing. Like we were apparently pretty poor at the time, but there was a lot of like ways my parents hid that from us. And I think like, yeah, like using day camp and stuff like that, it can kind of like distract kids a bit. But yeah, my sister brought up like, I remember that span of weeks where we'd have like instant ramen probably like twice a week. And I was like, no, I don't remember that at all. I remember like all the great meals we had. So yeah, parents are really good at hiding that from kids, I think.
Yeah.
But I guess I had another day camp experience. So my summer camp, the residential one, Phantom Lake, also had a day camp program. So the residential camp drew from Milwaukee, Chicagoland. Probably 50% of the kids were from Chicagoland. And then, yeah, Madison, some kids from like Minnesota, and then some few like foreign campers tossed in who like were visiting Chicago or had family in the region. But the day camp just drew from local Mukwonago. But one time I did it at a camper. I was counseling at the 5-year-olds, like the youngest day campers, kids who had like naps during the day, which I always thought was cute. You'd like read them a picture book. And I remember like turning the page in a picture book and a kid was just like, wait, no, go back. I forgot the picture. I just thought that was so cute. And so I turned it back and showed it to him. He's like, I got it. I was like, all right, good. We're going on. But I had a camper who was just adopted from China and he just had no idea what was going on. Just totally understandable. It's just crazy to toss a kid into that. Like, they're learning to speak anyways. And then now he's having to learn a new language. He doesn't understand anyone around him. There's now suddenly like very structured, we go to different things on a bell system. He gets to swim in a lake for the first time. I would always look at him with such bemusement. He was a very good natured kid. Like a few times he would get confused and freaked out. We'd have to counsel him and stuff. But like, broadly, he was game, I would say, for what was going on. But I remember having him in the craft shop and I was like tending to all the different 5-year-olds. And then I like look back and he was choking himself out with a plastic piece of like lanyard. And I'm like, this age group has no self-preservation. Like this is like kids don't even understand that they can be hurt. Because usually at residential camp, I was counseling like the 12 and 13-year-olds, like the older chunk of campers. And it's just like, you don't need to worry about them dying. Like they have that figured out.
So it was like the cord, like he had tied the cord around his own neck.
He hadn't really tied it, but he was just like, he was just doing that. And I was just like, come on, man, have a little bit of self-preservation. Like I turned my back for 3 seconds.
Yeah.
But yeah, and we had this, for when kids were at the waterfront, we had this tag system where you take a tag off of the land side with their name on it and you put it onto the water side. And I'd have to ask kids their like first and last name. They have to confirm it. And some kids like didn't know their last name. And I'm like, that's fair. You were 4 or 5 years old. I'd also ask them like what state they think they live in or they think they like are in. And it was just most like their town's name or they'd just like say like their street name. I thought that was funny one time. But yeah, they have no idea what's going on, but they're still having a good time.
Yeah. I mean, one time I asked one of my little cousins like what state she lived in and she said Bolingbrook.
Yep, there you go. It's such a weird, like, layered thing to teach kids. Like, you are in America and also Mukwonago and also Wisconsin.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then so going into, like, residential camps, res camp, as we would call it, actually, I guess. But yeah, we have a bit on here about Jewish summer camps. So yeah, they like have the same kind of origins as not the deep Civil War origins of summer camp, but the kind of 1800s progressive, get these, kids who are laboring in the factories out into nature for a bit. But then they became something very interesting post World War II as Jews were navigating like, oh, wow, we're attaining wealth. We're assimilating into America. Like, how do we do this dance of assimilation and cultural preservation? And summer camps were a way to do that. We're not going to send our kids to different schools. We didn't often do that. There's often, Hebrew school on weekends, but I'd say more so than Catholic kids, Jewish kids are used to going to public or private secular schools. But summer camp was like a free period of time for people to like keep Jewish culture, American Jewish culture alive in a distinct sense.
Yeah. So to prepare myself, I watched a YouTube video titled The History of American Jewish Summer Camps that was produced by the Museum of Jewish Heritage. And in it, they brought up that like Jewish summer camps were a place for like experimentation. And there were actually some sort of like developments in like Jewish culture that came out of these summer camps in different ways. One of which maybe isn't as good.
Yeah. Zionism.
Yeah.
It's not that Zionism came out of Jewish summer camps, but like you can find like, just like there's any type of American summer camp, there's a lot of variety between Jewish summer camps. And a lot of them were very Zionist minded, like preparing kids for a life or a future in Israel. And like, I'm sure a portion of like the cost of the camp would go to Zionist causes. Yeah. The summer camp I went to definitely had like a big time like Zionist leanings.
Yeah. Because the way the video explained it is like a child in an anti-Zionist household might then go to summer camp and get exposed to Zionist ideas for the first time, and then they might become a lifelong Zionist.
Yeah.
So like that was one way that things sort of changed. Another one, which like this one kind of went over my ear a bit just because I'm not Jewish and I don't know a lot about the culture, but they were saying that like music and singing like was sort of an innovation from Jewish summer camps.
So it's hard to say like we like chanting, prayer, song has always been a part of Judaism, but the way it's done in synagogue is not a very sensual is an interesting word to use, but like sensual or experiential, like, we're not the black church. Basically, like people are not like getting that animated. It's a pretty low key affair. But at summer camp, it is chanting, clapping, like stomping, all that kind of stuff. It's actually more similar. I guess we should say like the Jewish summer camps we're talking about are kind of on the lighter ends of observancy, meaning these are not the serious Orthodox, summer camps. These are Reform and Conservative. Conservatives is the branch that I grew up in. And so we don't do what the Orthodox Jews do, which is these frenetic like dancing things. The videos are wild. Yeah, it's just for the men basically, but they whip themselves up into this like fervor of excited dancing as a way to commune with God. And that's like one thing that we don't really have on the Reform side.
Yeah.
But so it really like, I don't know, if you want to bring people together, have them all singing the same song and dancing until they're dead tired, like that'll really unite people. And whatever like ideas you introduce to them at that very kind of vulnerable mind opening state will stick with them.
There's a term that's escaping me from Jonathan Haidt's The Righteous Mind. It's not collective effervescence, but it's something similar where basically we are sort of programmed to like when we move in unison, it does sort of like activate like meaning within us. It's very powerful.
Yeah. That's at Phantom Lake, how we'd like end tons of songs that we would sing together. Like at lunch, be very fun songs to kind of pep kids up. And morning music, we'd all like dance to songs together. And then at night, we'd use the kind of reverse of that to calm kids down. We'd all sing like slow American, kind of like American standards folk songs, like to bring the kids down to an easier level.
The counselors would.
Yeah, we would sing the songs. We'd get the kids like learning and singing them as well. They're very like simple choruses and stuff.
But no, I was just imagining only the counselors singing to the kids.
No, that'd be a little no.
Yeah.
But yeah, you also put in here that like there were very like socialist Jewish summer camps and the Workmen's Circle camp. And they had that. So like the Arbeiterung, as it's also known, it's like the German name for it. That was the socialist leaning like Jewish immigrants group that would help people assimilate, find jobs. But they were always at first very far left and then more left of center, or as my grandpa uses the term, fellow traveler, which is someone who wouldn't call themselves a socialist, but like trades in socialist ideas.
Yeah.
And my grandparents are still technically a member of like the Workmen's Circle, and they'll be buried in like a Workmen's Circle cemetery. Actually, it's a pretty cool organization. They're now like the Working Persons Circle now instead of Workmen's. But yeah, so they're pretty progressive. But yeah, they're a much smaller organization. It's one of those things of like when you kind of achieve assimilation, like these groups become less and less important, and it seems like their main priorities are just taking care of the cemeteries they've already committed themselves to. Like I don't think they're out expanding wildly or anything.
But yeah, it was interesting learning what I did from the video, because from my perspective, like summer camps are very traditional and rustic institutions. Like the quote I read in the beginning from the Not So Happy Campers article about this camp in Texas, Camp Mystic. When I read that, you know, I got this impression that it's very like trad, because like families have sent their children to there for like 3 or 4 generations. And it means a lot to families if, say, their daughter is going to bed in the same cabin, in the same bed that their grandmother went to. Mm-hmm. And so they want it to stay authentic. They don't want the experience to change very much. They want it to stay the same. And so, yeah, again, it was interesting though that like summer camps could be a place for like cultural innovation and change, because youth generally are the leaders of, you know, innovation and change. Yeah. But children, again, in the US, they're just so like, they don't have any impact on things. Mm-hmm. So like the video I watched, they said that like, you know, some of the way songs are sung, again, this kind of went over my head, but like the way
trickled
that,
up. Basically.
Yeah, it trickled up from these like children and the innovations that they had, which is interesting.
No, it's interesting because it's the campers, and the counselors are pretty young too. So when you talk about a youth movement, like it's, I mean, if it's 18 to 22 year olds and then, you know, like 8 to 14 year olds, like that's two sides of the youth movement. It's really like, I don't know. It often feels when you're a counselor like the inmates are running the asylum. Like you're a kid, like who's in charge of kids, you know, when you're that young. But
my mind just went in like a really crazy direction. I started to think about like Mao Zedong's Great Leap Forward. And I feel like that was like youth hyping each other up and acting out and going crazy.
It's like that Wandervogel German scouting movement we talked about last week. Like it was just like, unlike the more didactic Boy Scout thing of like an adult troop leader leading kids, it was just youths hyping themselves up and going into the forest and singing jingoistic songs.
I know, but yeah, that totally does go in the direction of like fascism and communism and stuff.
You need a vibrant youth for that. Like you can have old people like writing the treatises and stuff, but you need like jazzed up, angry young men to really make a kind of brown shirt movement work. But yeah, so on camp traditions, on my Jewish side, I think my grandma was a camp counselor at some point at some little like Jewish summer camp. She just told me how funny it was that like the tough city kids would get so scared at night because they were so used to New York City where like the lights are on all the time. And so when things were pitch black, they got really scared. But on the Irish Catholic side, my grandma actually went to Phantom Lake back in the 30s or 40s, I would say. And my parents didn't go because they would help run a summer camp in the summer. So my grandma was the home ec teacher. My grandpa was the football coach. So they'd have their summers off and they'd pack everyone into a camper van and they'd go up to a island in Canada and run a summer camp, which I always thought was really cool and idyllic. And I'd love to.
An island on the coast or on the Great Lakes?
No idea.
Okay.
I think the Great Lakes. Let's say that. But I should ask my mom. But yeah, so my Jewish summer camp experience was not so good. I had like committed to this camp. I was so excited. My friends at Hebrew school had started going to it. I was like, I guess I would have been 13. Yeah, I was 13 at the time. And then I was getting ready. It was like 2 weeks out from going there. And then my dad died. And everyone's like, all right, well, you obviously shouldn't go. But I was weirdly insistent. Like I wanted a distraction, of course, you know. And so I was late to the start of camp because of the funeral. And so I did not join in on the whole like starting of camp ceremony, which I talked about the busing thing. That's how this camp worked. Everyone showed up in buses from like LA, Las Vegas, because there were some kids from Las Vegas out there, and other just like California cities, basically. And there was this huge thing where they whip everyone into a frenzy and get all excited for camp. And I missed that. And then I was just the weird blonde kid with a dead dad. And I just did not really mesh with the group at all there. Like rich California Jews were not my kind of people. I didn't know enough about the Lakers and Kobe Bryant, and that was the main topic of conversation, I would say, for little curly-headed boys from the Valley.
I learned from a friend who was talking about the movie Uncut Gems that like there is this sort of unexplained phenomenon where like Jewish men get really into black basketball players.
Yeah, it's like because Jews did used to be good at basketball, or at least we were in it. I would say I don't know if we were especially good, but it's like because of the compact size of the court and it being pushed by things like the YMCA and more like urban organizations, like very urbanized groups of people are going to drift more towards basketball than they are to like, I don't know, golf or football, stuff that takes up more space.
I learned a statistic recently that at one point like New York City was 30% Jewish.
Oh, yeah. No, it's like 10% now. Like it's still pretty crazy. But yeah, so I don't know. Jewish guys are always, super intensely into, even though we don't seem to play it anymore and we just kind of we just own the teams and manage the players. Like, I don't know. I think we try and live vicariously through it. And if you go to like any gym in New York City or like LA, you will see very sweaty Jewish guys on the basketball courts, like leaving it all on the court, basically, like really, really playing it hard. I never got into basketball despite my height, but it was just such a weird experience there. Like you're a gawky, tween, basically, and I don't know, people made jokes to me before, like, oh, Jewish summer camp. Like, isn't that always like, isn't everyone hooking up behind the trees and stuff? And I'm like, yeah, not with me. I was like, I've never felt so sexually invisible as I was at Jewish summer camp. Like, I don't know. I was still short. I had braces and glasses and I had like long Justin Bieber-esque hair. It was just rough all around.
Were kids actually making out at camp?
I think I heard about it. Yeah. At the Jewish camp. On our last day there was like, everyone's like, all right, this is the last chance, So kids would be trying to sneak off, and they had like counselors posted like security guards around there. It felt like Metal Gear Solid or like a stealth video game because they had flashlights and they'd catch and they'd be like, hey, go back to your tent. Like it felt like you were on a cooldown. Basically, you could just kind of try again later. But yeah, everyone was playing a stealth video game to go try and get like their kiss with Rachel Scheinbaum or whatever their crush was that week. I had two counselors. One was a very like tan surfer bro type guy. He looked like Taylor Lautner or like an Abercrombie model. This was 2009, so the look. And then my other counselor was like pale and nerdy, and his thing was rapping, freestyle rapping. And he was the younger brother of BJ Novak, who's the actor from The Office, and he's like a writer, comedian kind of deal. But this was his young rapper brother, I guess. Yeah, it was weirdly structured. There was like classes. We had Hebrew class. We had like Jewish history class. It kind of sucked in that respect. And there was no lake either. It was like they had to find a lot more stuff for us to do. In a lot of camps, you choose like having specialties or classes that you have to go to every day. And I chose music, so I was trying to learn bass guitar at the time and failing. And then also Krav Maga, which was taught to us by like some Israeli guys who had, of course, done their like years in the military and all that and felt like they could teach us. But,
yeah. I mean, that could have been better, but it sounds pretty fun still, especially compared to what I did after my parent died, after my mom died. So after my mom died, instead of going to a summer camp, I went to stay with family friends in New Jersey, which was interesting because to this very day, it's still the longest period of time I've ever been out of Chicago, which was 5 weeks. Mm-hmm. And they lived in Vernon Township, which is a part of New Jersey that houses all the bears. You'll see it in the news where like, I mean, I did see bears all the time there, and like all their garbage cans have to be like bear proof. And like, anyways, yeah, the family I stayed with, we were family friends with them growing up because low key, I mean, I didn't know this until I was an adult, but my mom had dated their dad for a while.
Interesting.
But yeah, that family, they had 5 kids. And then my family, we had 5 kids. And then we actually adopted one of my other sisters a bit later. But yeah, we would go there to New Jersey and they'd come here to Chicago, and like we were very close with them growing up. And I kind of wish we still had a relationship with them, but then one of my sisters dated one of their sons. And ever since, like, we just don't really talk to them the same way. But yeah, I went there for a summer, and it was honestly like such a good experience, just in the sense of like I got to see what like an average American family was like, because like each of the children was like a different like mid 2000s stereotype. Like one of the sons was like a hipster who'd go to poetry slams. The other was like a jock who was on the football team who got a DUI. The middle daughter, like she was like semi emo and like would like talk about how she loved Twilight like all the time and Disney Channel. And then like the youngest son was closeted and gay, and he was really into Glee. So like each of them were like
And that's
exposing
what
me.
closeted is. It's being really into Glee.
No,
That's
he is
funny.
gay now, and
Oh yeah.
he's like on Broadway, and
Oh wow.
no, he's actually honestly very ripped. I'm not. I've never dated him or anything, but no, he's had a very good, very gay life.
Yeah, good gay life, I would
Yeah,
say.
but no, all of them though, like interesting to see how much they love pop culture and how much it spoke to them. Because like me as an alt person in an alt household, it's like
That's a funny thing to say, but like I get what you're saying with that. Yeah, it's just like not
no, I was being
atypical.
raised on Electroclash. Like I was not
Yeah.
being raised on like Disney Channel's
Yeah,
radio
top 40.
station.
Yeah, no.
Like
Mm-hmm.
I had a completely different life than they
Mm-hmm.
did. It was just good to experience, like, or just to see what
Yeah.
it's like to
A
just
slice
feel
of
like,
life, middle America in a
or
suburb
just,
of New Jersey.
yeah, just to like feel like pop culture speaking to you. I never have felt like it's spoken to me, you know?
Oh yeah.
But
Yeah,
yeah,
that's a good way to say that. Cause yeah, whenever I like get caught watching just like cable, like network TV, whatever, I'm just like, who is this? Who are the people this is for? Like, it doesn't feel like me at all. Like, I'm just wondering who this perfect demographic is.
the platform that's speaking to us is Weird Underground Podcast, which we're also
Yeah.
producing as we speak.
Yeah.
But one thing I will say that I didn't like about them though was that the kids would like badmouth their parents to a degree that was like literally like shocking, would make my jaw drop. Because like, for example, like they'd say to their mom like, "Oh, this is why dad wants to divorce you."
Oh my God, these kids are going straight for the jugular. Maybe it was just all the reality TV exposure. Like they're watching too much Bad Girls Club or whatever and think they can just scream at each
No,
other.
I was the one watching Bad Girls Club as a kid, but I didn't talk to my dad like that ever.
No, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, my sister would always do that. I don't know. And I just never felt the need for that to like yell at an adult like that. Like, no, I'm just like some little.
Yeah. No, I never like called at my dad in any way. I did a little bit when I turned 20, and then I realized a few things in retrospect. But yeah, as a kid, I never said anything when he was mad.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
This kind of reminds me of like my parents were, or my mom in the later bit, were still pretty like tightly policing. They eased up on a lot of like content stuff. So their big fear when I was really little was like Yu-Gi-Oh and Pokemon. They're like, no, we don't understand it. Not allowed to have it. And they opened up to that. But then well into like early middle school, it was no MTV in the house. That was crass and base. And then like no violent video games. So going over to friends' houses, and it was just like, I don't know, it's very like Las Vegas memory of like they have just so like people would just have so many dogs, and they'd be like outdoor dogs, and they have some giant couch, and we'd be watching MTV or playing like Halo or Call of Duty, like something gory, and then there's just like Snooki screaming on the giant screen, like giant, like not flat screen, but like thick screen TV. Like that is the Las Vegas mid 2000s experience, I'd say. Yeah.
Yeah.
So now we'll just kind of get into more of the anecdotes, my experience of like being a summer camp counselor and the kind of lens that like allows you to see America.
Yeah.
But so first of all, it was like kind of my introduction to the Midwest. I'd visited Chicago before, and I'd visited family in the suburbs outside of Madison, Wisconsin. But this was like really being amongst the Midwesterners. So I went to a very academically focused selective enrollment high school. We had no sports. Like any friend I had who did sports, it was pretty intense, like club or travel sports. So I had the friend who did like synchronized swimming. I don't even know how you get into that, how you find out about that. And someone who did gymnastics, specifically the rings, which I always thought was just the craziest type of gymnastics.
Yeah, you need a lot of strength for that.
Yeah, no. And so, yeah, not the usual, just kind of like regular sports. But then I met all these people in the Midwest, and everyone's on the track team. And I'm like, oh my God, like, are you like, is this like a big thing for you? They're like, no, I'm just like on the track team or on the swim team. And it was just pretty like that kind of relaxed, everyone does it attitude. Just, it felt like in my like school, if something didn't actively get you into an Ivy League school, it wasn't worth doing.
Yeah. My high school was a little bit similar in the sense that like the only kids who were good at sports were doing like solo sports that you see in the Olympics, you know, like diving and fencing.
Mm-hmm.
And then also though, my school, we weren't as into sports too, because in Chicago, honestly, kids in Chicago are just like not as well fed as the kids in the suburb, and they always beat us. They're so much stronger and taller out there.
You think they're stock, they're genetic stock, or is this nature or nurture? You were saying nurture there, but
it might be both. I know it might just be genetics of how predisposition they are.
People
to be
aren't
tall,
like
but
goldfish; they're not growing to the size of their 2-bedroom apartment.
No, I just feel like I do feel like suburban kids look healthier in like a certain way. And I'm not saying this in like a good way. I mean, I think there is a disparity in like health between like urban and suburban communities.
I think we're breathing in a lot more congestion and stuff.
Yeah. But no, they always did beat us. Like, I'm not making that up. I might have like weird like internet takes on like suburban kids being stronger, but like, no, it is true that they would beat us.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, like we were talking about in the Olympics episode of how like suburban coded high achieving American Olympians are. You know, they just always seem like they're getting driven crazy distances to their specialized camps and like giant, suburban SUVs. But yeah, it just feels like it's something that the suburbs have down. There's that suburb that's super good at this sport, and they just compete with the other suburbs there. It's just, yeah. I mean, I just felt like, the genetic stock in Wisconsin, like everyone says, oh, there's a lot of Germans and Scandinavians up here, but like there's some tall people. That was also a change of going from Las Vegas, where all my friends were Filipino, and then being like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Not that I was on the shorter side up there, but they grow them tall up in Wisconsin. It's all that milk.
For those who don't know, Joseph's like 6'3".
Yeah. Yeah. So being a counselor is just like such a look into how Americans raise their kids and just like the status of the generational chunk just like 5 years below you. So I guess this was Gen Z is what I would be counseling here. But problem campers are always, I think, it's my fear. Like, I want my kids to go to summer camp someday. And if I had a counselor tell me at the end of the week that like, yeah, little Jimmy he was pretty difficult this week. Like I'd feel so bad because I've been in that position of just like, this kid is like a complete, something to deal with. A lot of my like counselors I worked with stayed in education, actually. Like they were studying it when they were at college and they went on to like school or school administration. But I was just, engineering major during the year and then just kind of like drafted into this. But we could lean on each other and like, develop skills in counseling. And I always joke that like the skills I developed in directing children is very useful in dealing with subcontractors in construction because they're small business owners, so they're very like strong-headed and they're not used to being ordered around. And a lot of kids are like that depending on their raising. But yeah, we had a lot of kids on camper ships coming from poorer backgrounds. And so that was like, but that's not the typical. The typical camper was just some like middle to upper middle class kid from a suburb somewhere in Wisconsin. We had some pretty rich campers, like the GM of the Blackhawks sent his kids there. They all had mullets because there was a Blackhawks player who had a mullet at the time. And so all the kids had them too. Yeah. Which I thought was ridiculous. And then I think the drummer from Wilco, someone from Wilco, sent his kid to our camp. It was really funny because a counselor was telling me, she was like, was
it one of Jeff Tweedy's children?
No, it wasn't Jeff Tweedy.
Well, they went to my high school, actually.
Oh, yeah. But yeah, one of the counselors was like, I was asking my kids like what their parents do. And this one camper was just like, yeah, my dad's a drummer in some band. It turned out to be Wilco, but the kid was just not impressed by it.
Yeah. I mean, that must mean that the other like Wilco members live in Chicago too, which I didn't know. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, they got the Marina Towers on their album cover and stuff. It was also just really rough to see like the different, atypical living situations. I had a camper who like his dad had left and then his mom was in some kind of tough situation, either substances. And so he was living with his grandparents. And then and they put him at camp. This is pretty recent, I think, to his mom leaving. So they just kind of, not that they dumped him on our laps, but I think they were like, oh, this will be good for him. Let's get him out into nature. And the kid was not adapting well. He was pretty actively bullying the other campers. And it was tricky because we had 2 other campers in this tent who were adopted from Russia when they were really little, but they were 10 or 11 years old, perfect English, but going through their own struggles, very heavily medicated was one thing. Yeah. Like to deal with all the baggage that comes with being, growing up for the first 2-3 years of your life in a Russian orphanage. But it felt so bad to see like a kid going through struggles, like just he almost sought them out to bully them. And yeah, he really took a liking, the problem camper who was dropped off by his grandparents. He wanted to change tents because I guess he wasn't impressed by my counseling abilities or something. He wanted to be with this other counselor and we told him that wasn't a thing. And so he would try and like act out, but there's only so many ways you can act out in summer camp. So at taco night, he just like took shovelfuls of foods that other people couldn't have them, but we just went and got more seconds. And so It was just, I don't know. I remember saying to my co-counselor, like, nachos are a beautiful thing. They should never be made out of spite. You should never be like stacking a whole plate of food that you never intend to finish. But yeah, that was just sad to see.
Yeah.
But yeah, another camper I had, he was just standoffish and a little strange and wasn't making friends with the other kids. And then he told me that like he expressed a desire to like hurt animals, basically, and also to set fires, which I don't know if you know about the dark triad of that. The other thing was like bedwetting in there. We didn't have that. But I felt so bad because he really took a shine to me. He really liked me. One time he told me, he's like, I like you. I want to keep you. And I was like, that's creepy. It's bizarre. But I like talked to his parents at the end of the week and they were sweet as could be. And they were actually counselors at my camp like 20 years ago or so. And I was like, I just think I should bring up that like he's expressed this stuff about animals and I kind of had to keep him away from animals at different points at camp. And they're like, we really thought we squashed that in therapy. And I'm like, oh God, this kid is like, this kid is determined. But I don't know. I feel like I'm always like, I feel for the kind of weird kids. I feel like I was a weirdo kid at my summer camp, so I don't know, my heart goes out to them. But parents are supposed to fill out these like parent information letters ahead of the kid coming to camp, where they kind of give you a heads up on like, oh, his dog died a few months ago, or like he just had a new brother, so he's feeling a little, unsure of his place. And a lot of parents would do a good job at filling them out and like say what medications and what issues these kids have. But other times you just get a blank pill sheet, and that could be a good thing, low maintenance kid, not much going on. Or parents are just like, we don't want the counselor to judge our kid and what everything they've been through. And so then you would get a kid with like a lot of issues. We had one girl who was obviously struggling. She was clearly like autistic or Asperger's and was just not connecting with her tent and was getting overstimulated a lot. And so like the counselors were doing their best. So one counselor worked as like a nurse in training. Basically, she was in a nursing program at her school. So she reached out to nurses she knew who worked in psychiatrics in like the town that this girl was from. And they're like, we know this girl. Of course, she has crises like multiple times a month. And so parents would sometimes just send their kids to camp like and unmedicate them in one swoop as well. Just like, let's let them, kind of just get off of the amphetamines for a week and just put them into nature and see how that goes. And these kids were crashing and burning, I would say.
Did you ever have to send them home?
Sending kids home? 100%. Yeah. For bad behavior. No, mostly for like starting fights and stuff like that. But
it was like Bad Girls Club.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No. It was such a shame when it was like also like kids on camper ships, like behaving badly. It feels like, I don't know, like there's only so much camp can do, like as we're trying to like provide this thing for these kids, but they're coming from such rough environments.
Low-key, on Bad Girls Club, I've always found it funny when girls fight. It's very scary when men fight. It's like they can always kill each other. Yeah. Same applies for like little boys and little girls. I mean,
the stakes are so much lower. Like they just like kids fall and get right back up. They're just like rag dolls. Like they're fine.
Yeah.
But no, in terms of like having to separate kids, I've had to do it a few times, but like they're just kids. And
just pick them up.
Yeah, basically. And it was never like with the older campers. It seemed like it was with the little boys.
Yeah.
But yeah, which is a perfect segue into boys camp versus girls camp. Because the times I did have to separate fights, that was always boys camp. There's kind of like an interesting, the kids who go to boys camp, it says more about the parents than it does really about the kids, I would say. Yeah. But the parents affect the kids greatly, of course. The kind of dad I would see during pickup, like drop off, was a dad who would project things onto his son and be like, you can't have him around the girls. He plays too rough. He's a little rough and tumble. He's, kind of a boy in the dirt kind of thing. It's like, are we talking about the kid anymore, or is this just about you? Like, what's your?
Were they all the dads with the like really big holographic sunglasses?
Yeah, it was that type of thing, basically. Mm-hmm. A lot of like Harley Davidson type dads, big trucks, like cut off tanks, like real tree hats, that kind of deal.
Yeah.
I think I would say it more drew from Wisconsin than like we'd get less city kids. We'd get more rural and suburban kids.
Yeah.
But yeah, boys camp was the smelliest week, of course, too. Like just worse, like hygiene all around. But girls camp was great. Real kumbaya. I don't know, pretty well managed. The craft shop would get crazy packed. It'd be full to the brim. But no, that was also just a chill week for me as a counselor. I could just do like, I just help out at the assistant staff, basically. But
Yeah.
over time, boys camp got eliminated. There's just less and less demand for it, basically. And also, camp always has more girls. Well, the way I was always told it was that like boys get pulled away to sports camps later in high school.
Yeah.
So like when I was in the counselor and training program, like they'd always be kind of like hungry for guys, basically. There'd be tons of girls willing to like take counseling positions, but guys would be off at various camps and stuff. But
yeah, I can't relate.
Mm-hmm. We also had a teen camp, which was tricky because that's like kids 13 to 17. I checked the website and they say it's 13 to 16. I wonder if the 17-year-olds were always the trickiest because like, you know, the counselors are like ages 18 to 22. So like when you have a camper who's 17, it's just like all authority is invented, but it feels especially invented when that's like your age difference. But yeah, we had like one time I had a tent where I had like 4 campers taller than me. It had a really tall tent. And I was like, this is hard to maintain my authority. And then one of my campers that week, like one of the counselors took me aside and they're like, yo, my younger brother goes to high school with him. That kid sells shrooms. That kid's like a local shroom dealer.
Wow.
And I was like, oh my God. It's so hard to like have a kid like that and to be like, what'd you do during free time today? Like, did you go to the archery range? And this kid is like probing his psychedelic consciousness.
Yeah. I mean, the Art Foundation I teach at, I first started there when I was like 20, like sophomore year of college. And yeah, the first course I got was like a high school one. And so I was a 20-year-old in charge of like a few 17 or 18-year-olds. And it did feel weird. Like there wasn't the disconnect, you know, that I now have with younger people.
Yeah.
It was like in other situations, I could have been peers with these people. I mean, like we were close in age. So yeah, it is weird to like have to like sort of very clearly like define in your head, like, okay, no, like I need to view them as different, you know?
Yeah. We would have kids who like were entering their first year as a counselor in training, but then they had friends who like, you know, because of where they are in their birth year and all that, like they'd have friends who were still campers. And so sometimes kids would do like, oh yeah, I'm going to come to the first week of camp as a camper. And then later in the summer, I'm going to come back as a counselor in training. And that was always like dicey because it just like, it's just, I don't know, people thrive on clear delineations and roles, you know? Yeah, being a counselor taught me like how to be like an authority in a lot of ways. And I always learned that it's like, it's easier to be stern at the start and then ease up. And I actually do like genuinely use that with subcontractors. Like at the start of a project, I'm very firm on like, I don't know, showing up on time and like really kind of cut and dry with people. And then you can kind of loosen up later, but you can't like try and snap down later on people. I don't know. You learn a lot. Yeah, I'm super grateful for all the skills that summer camp gave me. I learned how to like run a zip line, sea kayaking, canoeing, sailing, archery, riflery, lifeguarding. Did that too. I can make fires. I can do some decent handmade crafts. I'm okay with the glue gun, I'd say, because we had to make like awards for all of our campers.
You could have gotten so many Boy Scout merit badges.
I think so. I forgot to send you that there was like for some reason on some social media feed, I saw that an Eagle Scout got every single badge. And whenever this happens, this is like national news. It's that hard.
Yeah.
That means he got the nuclear science one and the scuba diving. That's
very impressive.
Two different skills.
Yeah.
But yeah. And then it's also taught me like a lot of folk songs and stuff. I was already into folk music before, but I think that summer camp deepened that. I know the lyrics to Old Lang Syne, which is that weird, obscure Old English New Year's song that I always found really like haunting and pretty. But yeah. Random camp stories, grab bag. I had a camper's mom who was a Chanel fragrance sales rep. And at the end of the week, weird policy of like don't ask, don't tell on tipping, I would say. Not a lot of parents try and do it. I feel like they already feel like they're paying enough for that. But yeah, she gave me Bleu de Chanel, like men's fragrance. It was great. I loved it. I ran out of it actually.
Would you still wear it now?
I think so. It's pretty like, I think it's a fragrance from like the 90s or the 2000s when everything just went very clean, actually.
Yeah. And
so it's kind of boring, I would say. But I think I've gotten a little more adventurous with my like fragrance choices, but it just seems like a good background. And it's like $80, I want to say. So I don't know.
I think I wear like a Chanel cologne, if I'm not mistaken. I was gifted it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I just put it on.
But yeah. So on the aesthetics of summer camps, it's something that's we'd mentioned earlier is like very stuck in the 70s in a lot of ways.
Yeah. So As I mentioned on the 70s episode, I've never been a fan of 70s fashion. Yes, I'm nostalgic and sentimental for the American Apparel version of like 1970s clothing. But honestly, I just don't think like men look good in tank tops and athletic shorts. Like it's not a good look.
Yeah, they more often end up looking like Juno's boyfriend. What is it? Michael Cera in Juno, where he's got like little short shorts and the sweatband. Yeah, it can be a rough look. But yeah, like the American 70s summer camp counselor look is, what is it? It's like ringer tees, which I actually do like. They're nice because you can't like sweat stain them, basically. It can be a white shirt, but then with the ringer around the neck and the sleeves. Ringer socks too, like the 3-stripe socks. And then
American Apparel staples.
Yeah, no, these are all find their ways into American Apparel. But yeah, these are like the first forms of like athleisure wear as we know it now. Where like earlier forms of athletic wear were like, I guess as we talked about in past episodes, the polo shirt, and then like people wearing sport coats, but like it's not real athleisure. Like I don't know how the hell people were doing polo and that stuff. But yeah, and there's also just thanks to this look has been immortalized by the movies of the time, but it's not really the 70s. I realized when I looked at all the classic, like there was basically a string of summer camp sex comedies starting from like 1980 on to around 1988 or so. And so I think the one that comes to mind most immediately is Meatballs, which they made up to like 4 of them, I want to say. And it's always about kids trying to like have their first kiss or something and then pranking people. And there's like always a hot girl counselor. There's some cheesy scene.
Yeah, I think I watched like Meatballs once with my family, or at least the first half of it, because my parents were like, we're not watching this. Like, this is too graphic. And then we turned it off. I remember saying that to them, like, oh, I don't know what it means. I'm a kid, which I always would say when things were graphic, and they'd be like, yeah, we're turning this off. And I'd be like, no, I don't know what it means. Like, we can keep watching it. But I haven't seen too many of these films, but I do think that like the reason the 70s is portrayed and interpreted as being so sexual is because it was the first point at which there was no like ad hoc justification for sex and sexuality, because I mean people were like constrained by Christianity like prior to the 60s. Then during the 60s, free love was used as like a justification for like having sex. But yeah, by the time the 70s came around, you could just do it and you didn't have to have a reason. And so I think that's why it's seen as being so sexual.
Yeah, no. It's so funny. Like these movies really can't be made today. People say that about a lot of stuff. Like people say, oh, you couldn't make Blazing Saddles today. It's too politically incorrect. I'm like, what are you do you like, have you seen any like podcast or stand-up special? Like, no, people are saying, raunchy, controversial stuff. But there's just, I don't know. I just don't like sex comedies broadly.
Yeah.
I think comedy movies are fun to watch with your friends. And why do you want to be like lightly aroused when you're with your friends? Like, I just don't get the appeal of it. With like exception, I guess, unless you want to call like Superbad a sex comedy. It's a comedy about guys trying to have sex. And I think that movie is very funny.
Yeah. I mean, I posted in the Discord server a screenshot of this, these comments that someone had made on another Discord server where they described like a certain genre of male sexuality as being pie on the windowsill sexuality.
Yeah, the humana kind of sexuality.
Yeah, where it's not about necessarily the actual pursuit or conquest of like sex and obtaining it. It's just about a general love of the spirit of it, and it's sort of innocuous. And yeah, I feel like that gets lost in like these sex comedies. That's not actually what's going on. It is about just like actually seeing people do the act, and it's really gross.
Yeah. And like the fact that those movies kind of look so jarring and weird to us and how they treat sexuality is like what makes good parody movies in like Wet Hot American Summer, which was made in the mid 2000s, I want to say, and is a send up of 1970s summer camp sex comedies. I think it's just a great movie. The cast is stacked. Like it was a lot of actors right before their comedic careers like blew up. But no, I think it's a fun movie, totally worth a watch. I just really like the scene where they go into town. Basically, have you seen Wet Hot American Summer?
I haven't seen most movies, so no, I haven't seen it. No.
No. But yeah, it's just my recommendation.
Yeah. I mean, you know how I've always said like Some Like It Hot always sounds like a very like sexual mid 2000s movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, like that could, if you told me that was like
Wet,
a summer camp movie,
American
I'd be like,
summer,
yeah, it makes sense. Yeah.
They did such a good job, like, I don't know, having fun with the inspiration. They even have a style, like the movie poster for it is a 70s style poster where they would have like these kind of like boardwalk caricature style posters, I would say.
Yeah.
But yeah, great movie.
But yeah, now we can get into other depictions of summer camps in media. So I want to start out with Total Drama Island, which will be a delight for all of our Canadian listeners, because this show was broadcast in the US all over Cartoon Network, like every day for hours. And I think it was sort of a precedent for what later happened with Teen Titans Go, because Teen Titans Go, they started to show it on their channel for literally 24 hours a day, like multiple days a week.
I didn't know they made enough of that to do that. I mean, this is after I stopped watching like Cartoon Network. But
Cartoon Network got bought out in a merger. And like all mergers, it's been bad for consumers, including in terms of Cartoon Network programming. It's really sucked. I'm sounding like a real nerd right now. But anyways, when I was growing up, Total Drama Island was on TV like all the time.
I didn't like it. I was always bummed that it was on TV all the time. I don't know why it didn't grab me.
It wasn't my first choice, but it was kind of funny because TDI, it was a parody of reality TV show competitions, and it followed like a large group of contestants competing for $1 million. And in between their competitions, they were living at a summer camp that was kind of run down. But I think it sort of beat the reality TV show genre at its own game, in the sense that whenever you watch reality TV, usually they like, when they're introducing the contestants or their characters, they oftentimes immediately give you a way to like pigeonhole them into a stereotype.
Yeah.
And they'll be like, you'll immediately know like, oh, I should read this person as being like a hillbilly or a hippie, or that girl is a dumb blonde. Like they give you that lens immediately. And that doesn't work that well in real life, because people, they oftentimes are more complex than they look. But Total Drama Island is nice because you can look at each of the characters and you know immediately what their personality is like.
Yeah, they're clearly identifiable. They like, fit a certain archetype.
Yeah, like one of them looks like a goth. You can tell she's moody. It's like not hard to guess.
So many goth characters in Cartoon Network. Oh, I guess I'm thinking of Danny Phantom, and that's on Nickelodeon.
Yeah, this is actually one of the things that's like so genius about Pokemon, is like it is intuitive because you can guess what their types are and you can tell which one's stronger than another by how they look. But yeah, TDI is like that, where like you can just sort of like guess what their personalities are like. But one thing I feel like I might not have been getting right when I was younger was like, I didn't interpret really any of the TDI characters as being like particularly Canadian, because I'm not Canadian. And so the only character that read to me as being from Canada was this one I looked up called Ezekiel. He was the first one to get eliminated on the first season. And he was from Alberta and had like a really strong accent and talked about hockey. And that was really obvious. But usually it was like, I still don't know though. Like if I talk to a Canadian person, they'd be like, oh yeah, that character, that's like a Toronto stereotype. Like I would be really interested in hearing if like they are, if they could read them more specifically.
I just always like learning about, like, if I want to learn about a culture, they're high and they're low, like people that are looked up and down upon, basically. Like Australians have, I don't know what their rich person is exactly, but I know their poor person is bogans. That's their hillbilly.
Oh, yeah.
And they're like, their language they're known for.
I know that word from Summer Heights High.
I don't know what that is.
It's a very good show.
Oh, but yeah, bogans. And then, it's like, I don't know, just knowing that every country seems to have, assuming it has a heartland, it has a hillbilly, That's why I say, like, Arnold Schwarzenegger's accent, like, reads as very hillbilly to people. It's very, like, hee-haw. But to us, it just reads as Arnold Schwarzenegger's accent. Like, it just doesn't like fit a social schema. It's just like, it's an idiolect. It's just him. We can't imagine there's a whole region of Germany where everyone sounds like that. But,
and it's really interesting with Polish culture too, because there's so many Poles in the city, and they have like city Polish people, countryside Polish people, and then a third secret which are Highlander Polish people, and they're the most bizarre. They talk in a really weird way. Their food is whack, but they're cool. I mean, I know some of them.
That's my very good friend David. He's a Highlander, and I think I might have mentioned this on the pod that, like, the Polish people who came to Chicago around World War II and earlier were like city Polish people, and then the Highlanders started coming in the 90s, and so there's like an interesting disconnect there. But
there's some tension.
Highlander House, great restaurant, but you have to drive all the way to the southwest suburbs to get it.
So the next sort of like depiction of summer camps in the media I want to talk about is the Addams Family Values. So this was a sequel to the original film, and this sequel is like definitely a lot better. It's the one in which Wednesday has this really famous scene that I'll link in the show notes that's sort of referred to as Wednesday's Revolt, where at the end of summer camp, they're putting on this like play for the families where they're dressed up as pilgrims. But then Wednesday and all of the other alt children, they're dressed up as Native Americans. And then they like attack the pilgrims and set the entire stage on fire.
God, I love that movie so much. That was just huge for our family. I don't think I watched the first movie until like much, much later. But it's funny because like I think I had a pretty like well-mannered, not alternative family. I don't think we saw ourselves as like the weird ones on the block or anything, though. Oftentimes I think we were the weird ones on the block because we were so well-mannered. Like we were often in some rough areas. Like when we lived in Arizona, or my mom didn't like me going over to my friend's house, and then later, and my parents told me like you can't go over there. Like their trampoline doesn't have a net around it. And then later my sister was like, no, the parents were actually drug dealers. So I asked my mom, like, is this true? Were they drug dealers? She's like, yeah, but also that trampoline did not have a net. Like, that's very dangerous. Yeah. And that was probably more likely to affect us than the drug dealing.
Yeah.
But yeah.
But yeah, on the Addams Family, did I ever tell you what my grandmother used to say about it?
No.
Well, she used to get pissed and tell people to turn it off, and she'd say it was not Halloween every day. She was offended by how dark it was. But yeah, I think it's good to bring up the Addams Family Values because their depiction of camping as being very WASPy. And then also just like it touches on how both, you know, for scouting and for summer camps, they incorporated sort of falsely Native American traditions and cultural symbols. We really haven't gotten into this, but I'll put a link in the show notes to a good NBC News article on the topic. I mean, you seem to know a little bit about that with Boy Scouts.
Yeah. So, I mean, then speaking of my own summer camp, like we had different units of tents. Like there was the mountain units, like Everest, Kilimanjaro, that kind of stuff. And there was one unit, I think it was the adventure unit, that like there was an Indian unit, like a Native American unit, that had like modern tribe names, Apache and all that. But then there was like an older Indian unit that like I saw their names were left on a few things, and it was like Fox, like which was a true like tribe, I think. But yeah, the camp definitely over time tried to move further and further away from just like doing the weird white people rehashes of Indian stuff, of Native Americans.
Because I don't know if you said in the episode, but you wrote in the show notes how, you know, right as Native American culture was quote unquote, you know, on the cusp of being like wiped out, then all of a sudden people were fervently trying to like adopt their cultural traditions.
Yeah, basically. It's like we just turned them into this like symbol divorced from reality. And we already like kind of wrote them a obituary and then kind of dedicated ourselves to their memory when we were actively destroying them. As people say that about the West, like by the time the story of the Wild West was being told, it was already being fenced in by barbed wire and had railroads everywhere. Like it was ending by the time we were like eulogizing it.
Yeah. And then the last thing in media about summer camps I want to bring up is a Soviet film called Welcome or No Trespassing. And so this movie actually isn't an American summer camp, or it's not depicting an American summer camp. It's depicting a Soviet one, which actually was really interesting because I'm sure this isn't what like Soviet summer camps looked like, but it was depicting a Soviet idea of a summer camp because the film director, he'd created all of these like plaster busts of scouts and put them in like the gates of the camp. And then the actual gate of the camp had like blinking neon lights on it. And it like had this like aesthetic that I think touches on this like habit in Soviet culture where they would like elevate institutions that just would never have been elevated in the West. Like, for example, there were workers that were particularly productive, and say they had like the output of say 10 other workers that then be put on the cover of magazines and things like that.
Yeah, the guy who like hauled all of that coal or something. You mentioned him in the Boy Scouts episode when you're reading that quote. It's about like how, you know, we can't imagining kids doing anything like impactful is like imagining Paul Bunyan or this, you know, Soviet miner who just shoveled, you know, 20 metric kilos of coal. They would elevate things. I think America got a touch of that in the 20s and in the 30s with the Works Progress Administration. Like the way we would treat very, I don't know, boring infrastructure buildings would have like a sense of grandeur to them and triumph. I think about there's this one power substation in the Loop next to the Block 37 Mall here in Chicago, and it's got this bas relief drawing of a man connecting two lightning bolts together, and it's just like a it's a substation. It's like a, very boring electrical building, but it seems to have this like sense of like, no, this is where power is joined together to light the whole city.
It is very pretty.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I really liked watching Welcome or No Trespassing. It's really like the cinematography in the film is very beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
And the plot revolves around this like little boy who's kicked out of camp for swimming in the wrong area. But then instead of going home, he actually comes back and lives clandestinely, like in hiding. And then at the end of the movie on like Parents' Day, when everyone comes back, he reveals he's been there the whole time. But it's a satirical comedy. There are a few really weird things about it. I won't say what. I won't say what.
I have to give it a watch.
I mean, someone smacks a pig with a shovel. But no, I won't go into everything. I do really recommend it though. I don't have a good taste in movies. This one felt like something I'm going to think about for a long time.
That is a refrain on every episode, Nathan.
No, it's not. I don't say that all the time.
You can have a little more faith in your taste,
Yeah. Well, I mean, 2 episodes from now, we're going to be reviewing Megalopolis.
Oh, yeah.
That's going to be a Patreon exclusive, actually. So
nice.
I'm excited for that. Because I only get excited about a few movies each year. And this
one hit you like a brick. This one, like, you were like urgent, like wanting to see this.
Well, because when people talked about it for the first time, like it had premiered at, I think, the Cannes Film Festival, but I interpreted it like, oh, it premiered, like, man, I didn't know this movie was coming out. We missed our shot to review this. And then it turns out it didn't actually premiere like...
Yeah, it always does the festival circuit and then it goes to the other one. But
yeah, so we actually had a shot.
No. But no, a good trailer does go a long way with me as well.
Yeah. Because with that episode, we're going to get to review the actual movie, but then also talk about Megalopolis. It's going to be a very like urbanist episode.
Yeah.
And I'm excited for it.
Yeah. But yeah, so rounding it out on summer camps, like all in all, I think we did kind of keep it, besides talking about the Russian movie, we kept it very like American in this, just kind of what we could talk about. And it's because America has like, so much outdoors that we have enough space to build all these camps out there on cheap land. But I think it's such a good environment for kids to kind of like be this place that isn't school, isn't home. Where they can just kind of try out new parts of their personality. I think I always kind of did that as a kid. I was like, oh wow, I could be anything out here. But yeah, it gives like nature to kids who really need it, especially because like suburban life does not deliver the nature that people think it does.
Yeah,
only really rural kids get that. And so like, I don't know, a lot of kids are pretty freaked out by like not having air conditioning and stuff. And I think camp was very good for them. On the kind of like, rich camp, poor camp kind of thing. I think that every camp should try and seek its like perfect amount of roughing it. When I was at Boy Scout camp, we had like a very bad tent that was just on top of a pallet, basically, and there was like no breeze or anything. But like at the summer camp I ended up going to, like we had like nice wood floors, but more than that, I've heard that there's camps that have like air conditioning, basically. It's like cinder block cabins, and that's too far, I think. So like, I don't know, it should be a way for you to like, especially for city people, like I want to raise my kids in a city, but I don't want them to have zero exposure to nature. So I think that like the most cost-effective way to do that, instead of us flying out to like nice nature places across the country, would be parking them at a summer camp for a few weeks every summer.
Yeah. And I didn't get to talk about this because I only talked about my day camp experience, but I was a Cub Scout. I got to go to like camp with my Boy Scout troop. It wasn't really the true camping experience because I stayed in a tent with my dad, and I didn't get the same experience of like being away from family and like waking up and going to bed with like children that weren't familiar to me, which I think is the camping experience ultimately. But I think time slows down a lot when you have nothing to do. No, it's true. And I think that like summer camps can keep you a little bit busy, but like that aspect of like childhood where like, you genuinely don't really know what to do with your time. It does just make life, okay, maybe not like the most fun it can be, but it does just make it more memorable. And I think that that's why it's so important.
Yeah. I do think that the reason my camp is special is because it's like an average American summer camp. But one thing I was told we did do differently from other camps, we had a very large amount of unstructured time. for kids. They'd have their 2 specialties, their like classes that they chose kind of. And they do those 2 in the morning. You know, you're just like, oh, I chose swimming and then I chose land sports. All that unstructured time in the afternoon. It was really interesting to see kids just kind of be self-directed. It was interesting to observe. Like they would just naturally clump up into groups. And also in terms of doing nothing, the American Camp Association makes us give kids a rest hour after lunch, which is like exactly an hour on the dot. And the younger kids have difficulty with it, you know, doing nothing for an hour. They end up watching the clock. And they're like, wait, when did rest hour start? Like, when is it ending? And then you're like not allowed to make too much noise, but then those 10 minutes before free time opens up, you'd see kids start to like plan their day and be self-directed in that way. And I think that was always really cool to see. Like, you got to give them a little more credit. Like they form little societies almost instantly.
Yeah. But yeah. Thanks for listening to this week's episode. The next one is going to be on, can you say it?
Chautauquas.
Yeah, it's actually difficult for me to even spell. So, and that's going to be like a good conclusion to this 3-part series on American culture and outdoors.
It's a little snippet of like this kind of turn of the century sentiment in America about what the hell do we do with our outdoors and how do we like use this to transform the American populace.
Yeah. So we'll see you next week and have a good one.
See ya.
Bye.